Welcome to the third episode of this podcast, Stuck in the Middle. Stuck in the Middle explores divergent issues. Sometimes we get caught up with ambivalence, not sure whether to do this or to do that. And largely, this podcast explores psychological themes. And in this podcast, we will look at some core ideas from this book, Range, by David Epstein. And what David says is, how can generalists triumph in a specialized world? He's not talking about a case against specialization, but he says we need to sample a variety of experiences before making a decision. And that decision should be our own choice. And he relates it with the story of Roger Federer and Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods picks up golf as a young man at the age of 4 and goes on to become a champion. Whereas Roger Federer plays a variety of games, picks up a couple of different experiences, and very much later in his life, he chooses tennis and he becomes a world champion in tennis. So the question is, how do we pick up these adjacent skills, these diverse skills? And this book is a refreshing departure from cliched prescriptions. He talks about one, kind learning environments, which basically very much driven by structure, like chess, classical music, and wicked learning environments where the environment is very uncertain. We got to learn multiple things. So we look at several things. And of course, we bring in things like the 10,000 hour rule, proposed by Gladwell, taken from psychologist Erickson. We want to look at the psychology of talent development. How can we develop talent, whether it's generalist or specialized, to meet the needs of the nation? And to address this theme, we have got two outstanding panelists with us today. Datuk Wira Shahul Dawood, the Chief Executive of the Human Resource Development Corporation, and Norlida, the Chief People Officer of Axiata Telecommunications. So let's go to them and ask them, what do they think about this book, Range? Well, thank you, Oli, and thank you, Dr. Wira Shahul, for being here. I'm sure you're very familiar with this book, The Range, where David Epstein talks about how generalists triumph in a specialized world. So, Oli, you come from Axiata, which is all about specialization. So tell me, how do you make the case, or how do you critically review David Epstein's work on having generalists in a world that's really focused on specialization?
Thank you, Tan Sri. It's a very interesting question. Beyond just our organization, it's also the world always talk about digitalization, AI, ChatGPT, but the implication of how it's adopted into the business is another thing. And when you think about Axiata, there is a need for certain roles to have specialization because we want to build deep knowledge and we want to take it to the next level, right? If anything else, our world of connectivity actually can be leveraged to drive the AI of the future. Mm-hmm. But increasingly, we are finding that at some level, one of the things that my CEO will always say is, knowledge in the adjacent fields are important. Mm-hmm. So what if you create a more superior product or service when it's not to the relevance of what the community wants? Mm-hmm. But also when you look from an internal perspective, what you do need to make a commercial viability. How do you turn it to be profitable for the company? But increasingly, another angle that comes specialization, generalization is we all play a role in being responsible corporate citizens. Sure. The sustainability, the ESG connection comes up in that. What is my contribution in that? So therefore, Tan Sri, I think we need to see the roles. Right. And for some, you really need a deeper content of specialization. Mm-hmm. But I think building adjacent knowledge is really critical in a world such as ours, Tan Sri.
So this is what Steve Jobs says, that if he had not dropped out of college and gone and taken a calligraphy course, then of course he would not have been able to create those beautiful fonts on Apple.
Absolutely.
So he says it was not about coding, it was not about just pure computer hardware or software, but it was some adjacent knowledge that gave him the idea to drive something.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's the case that you would actually say that basically, end of the day, education is all about problem solving, right?
Absolutely.
And thinking and problem solving.
Yes.
So you'd want somebody to have some adjacent knowledge so that they have a variety of experiences so that they could apply it in a variety of contexts.
Absolutely, and I think connecting the dots is very a key skills that we need to have. So if you think like an organization like us, we are saying that we wanted to give a level playing field. So we said, how can we make everybody a data citizen? So there's a foundational basic course that all our 12,000 people needs to go through. We're still in the journey because data literacy and familiarity is now a given. You must have it, and I feel that organizations have to be responsible to at least help our people, whether in the professional or the personal life, to be literate in this.
Oh, wonderful. So, Datuk Shahul, she says data citizens. So those days I used to hear the word data scientists. We train data scientists. But now she uses the word, Ollie uses the word data citizens. So it's becoming something like a fundamental skill set. So being with an agency that's tasked with developing the macro economic needs of talent, how would you actually see this comparison between specialization and having a generalist knowledge?
Thank you, Tan Sri, for having me here in this very prestigious podcast. I mean, of course, I have to differ from what Ollie says, because she comes from the corporate industry. I mean, we go from the perspective of the human capital development for the whole nation. We can't have a nation full of specialization. We need to have a nation who are, first of all, to us, the fundamental, the basics have to be right. The basics can be obtained only when you have that generalization. A lot of when you have a lot of catastrophe happens in the country. For instance, COVID-19 was a classic example. If you go back to that scenario and situation, people who are generalized in their whatever skills they have, they are able to adapt to those challenges. People who are from the specialized area, there are a lot of challenges as well. But of course, there's a lot of pros and cons. But I mean, in a generalization, you have lesser losses, but when you are specialized, the impact of you is very high. And so, for us, the future of learning is going to be very complex, very challenging compared to what we had in the past. Today, we are just not talking about technology changes. We have countries adapting for nationalization. They prefer to have, for example, if you go back to Middle East, if you go back to Saudi, they go for Saudiizations. That is one thing. Then you have catastrophes coming in. So there's a lot of opportunities that is available for generalists. And when you are generalized, then you can opt to go for specialization. I'm sure that's something which I learned from reading from the book Range.
Sure.
You delay your specialization. You don't have to jump into a specialization now when you don't understand the broader picture of generalization. That's my opinion on that.
Oh, thank you, Dawood. And I think that's something very similar to what Oli also said. Of course, she sees it from the perspective of industry where we need specialization. But I think even David Epstein says in the book Range, he says he's not against specialization, but like what you say, allow people a variety of experiences, adjacent experiences, so that people can make up their mind what they want to be. Because sometimes in the university I find that people come and join a medical program and they want to be doctors, and then after 3 years or 4 years they say, hey, no, I don't think this is what I want. And so they shift. So, and that's primarily what David is saying here. Get people to sample a couple of things so that they can make up their own minds. And that's one of the things that he talks about, Tiger Woods and Roger Federer. And he says Tiger Woods was this classic guy. At the age of 4, he goes golfing and he wins 15 majors. But Roger Federer was just playing around everything from football to baseball to volleyball, until when late in his teens he picks up tennis and he becomes a specialist in that game, and he wins many majors. Yeah. So I think the challenge is, because from the agency perspective, you're always talking about from a macroeconomic employability. high value employability, and you always say that we do not want to get caught in the middle income trap. Malaysia is caught in the middle income trap. So how do we create high income jobs, right? So how would you respond in the scenario of generalization and being a generalist versus specialization and high employability, high value jobs?
Firstly, Tan Sri, the corporates have to ensure that they believe in the learning and development process. If you want to have a high income nation, high value chain, the skill set have to compensate or complement that. If you go back today, the government want to introduce a progressive wage. All these things are directly tied up to skills. Corporates have to come to the understanding that learning and development is part of everybody's culture and progress. That's why we continue to preach about lifelong learning. People think that I'm a gold medalist in my university, so I don't have to learn after that. I'm specialized in certain areas after I don't have. Today it's not that.
And your expectations keep
expectations are changing. Your stakeholders are changing, your surroundings are changing, global market, geography, everything is changing. If you don't continue to upgrade yourself, you are going to be left behind. I mean, I always say that today's world is a very complex world. Last time, Tan Sri, specialization is, you see very small number of people specialize. Today, specialization become very generalized. That is something which I see, because last time technology is become specialized. Today, and you go vertical. In technology, there are many things you can specialize, data analytics, artificial intelligence, robotics. Then you go more detail in robotics, and the robotics you go into micro, macro, and all this kind of thing. So specialization has become vast. So, but before you go into that, even either you become an employee or employer, you must understand the basics of that particular subject.
Sure.
And if you want to upskill yourself, it's a global issue. Employers, when it comes to training budgets, first thing they cut is the training, because they want to protect the bottom line, they want to protect the good P&L of the company. But the things are changing today. That classically shown in our data. What I speak today is the real-time data. At Shadicorp last year, we trained almost 2 million people. That was all-time high in the history of the last 30 years. We collected 2.1 billion levy collection with the utilization of 84%. It was never done in the history of HRD Corp. We even struggled 2 years ago. We struggled just with 45%, 47%, 50%. That means we have come to a level today. It's not about the budget for the training and development. It's about the time has become a very important component. So we continue to go back and preach those corporates. If you want to make Malaysia a high-income nation, the only way that you could do that is by producing a high human capital development. Nobody come to Malaysia because we have a Twin Towers, or we have a 5G, or we have a good public works or infrastructure. People come here because we have a good human capital. That can be reflected only when people believe that lifelong learning is the way forward.
Certainly, certainly. I think one of the things is, I'm not sure whether you guys were born, but when I was going into the university, maybe you guys were not around yet at that time yet. People used to ask me in interviews, well, can you use Microsoft Word, or can you use Microsoft Excel, or those days it was WordPerfect, I think, or the Lotus Notes or whatever. But now, nobody asks you in an interview, do you know, are you computer literate? Because it's a fundamental. The bar has gone on higher and higher. And I think in a couple of years, nobody's going to ask you, can you use ChatGPT or AI? Because it's going to continue to move up. But there's one thing which is very clear. Tiger Woods' father said, while I thought that this young man is going to be exceptionally talented, as when he was young at 4, he could just swing a club and he could just hit the ball so well, the golf ball so well. He made a very important statement, and the important statement was, I never forced him to take up golf. It was his choice. And so, Oli, how would you actually move into your employees and say, I think Datuk also said about lifelong learning, but how do we balance this choice and lifelong learning? Because in some organizations like Google, they say, we don't want you to learn about your job, we want you to learn about something else as well, Justin. So what would your comments be there, Oli?
Absolutely. I think inherent in our culture across Axiata is what we call the continuous learning.
Right.
And that's very imperative. Of course, learning has many platforms, right? One is I think during COVID lockdown, there was such a thrust for organizations to invest in learning because people were stuck and they were dedicated to learning, right? So now when people start coming back, you know, perhaps in some organization it's been like, oh, if you can afford time to go and take a course, you must be very free. Forgetting that learning hours is actually an investment into the organization. So I need to go back and sometimes tell my business managers, releasing your people is really an investment for the future. So we completely believe in lifelong learning throughout the cycle. But I think these days, our employees themselves are also asking experiential learning. So there's a classroom read, or sometimes we have this bite size, and everybody talks about this, right, Tan Sri? But how do we motivate people to want to learn is another thing. Because now that we've come back to work, and some companies ask everybody to, it says, oh, I spend time stuck in traffic, I don't have time to learn. So I do believe organizations have to have a commitment in their individual development plans of how do you build growth. And growth comes from either classroom learning, experiential, networking, mentoring. So what we try to capture from the organizational side is what are the other avenues of learning that enhances it. And increasingly we are finding that one of the fundamental learnings that we have to do is open people's mindset. And when we talk, Datuk, about this generalist, right? People must be open to learn about other things, because somebody says, why does it matter for me in finance to learn what AI does? Because eventually I want to know the ROI for my investment in this kind of a training actually pays up for the business results. So ultimately always anchoring. And also when I see the change of workforce demographics, right? I think about 1 month ago, the world is much more dominated by millennials and boomers. So for them, that one purpose, that one's authenticity, how do we bring that learning? So that's what corporates now need to shift. And I echo what Datuk said, sometimes because we're so pushed for expenses, what gets cut first? My training budget. Oh, it breaks my heart. You know what I mean? Because I think you're seeing it as a cost and not as an investment. So I think, Tan Sri, to make our people, not just for the organization, but across the community we play with, we have to invoke this continuous learning that comes from many avenues. That's my thinking.
Thank you. I think two thoughts there very quickly. I think the first thought is, I remember most of us who have been parents, we send our children to painting, to art, to piano, to violin, to football, to everything. And I think with the younger generation now, because I have a niece who is about 3 years old, so the other day she came by to the house and I said, are you okay? And she said, no, I'm not okay. So I said, why are you not okay? And she said, because you've not given me a mobile phone. So she could just get on to YouTube and she could skip the advertisement and do it by herself. So there's a different kind of a learning that takes place. But sometimes you find that we also try to do too many things, okay? But one of the things that David says in his book Range is, he says, well, if you're not interested, you'll give up by yourself. And I found that with my kids. Some of them went into music, some of them went into sports, but some of them said, no, it's not my cup of tea, I don't want to do it. But really, I think it's about influencing and kind of selling the concept of continuous development or learning. So I know that you've got thousands, I'm not sure how many thousands of employees you've got now contributing. So how do you influence them to keep continuing the journey of learning? Because sometimes it's not tangible, it's intangible. The results come by much later. Just before you answer it, I wanted to tell you something. During COVID, I found that I wanted to go and learn how to play chess. Now I had played chess, but nobody had taught me how to play chess in a proper way. So I learned what's the Sicilian defense and the Italian attack and all of that. And it was interesting because a young Malay lecturer who taught me, he was a lecturer, but a very young guy, maybe about 22, 23. So he was very shocked that a 60-something wants to learn to play chess. And he would say, every time you sacrifice a piece, you would say, you must understand the consequence of it. just like in management decision making. So I said, wow, not bad. He's able to actually kind of have a diagnostic way of thinking and go ahead.